most of the faces are familiar here. You all know me. I'm Keith from the Education Department and also a part of the Faculty Development Team. Good morning and welcome to Primetime BU at the library. Primetime is a collaborative project between the Friends of the BU Library and many offices on campus that celebrates learning beyond the classroom and the experiences and accomplishments of Bethel faculty, staff, and students. Faculty last call, have you received an exceptional research project that requires significant library research? The Friends of the BU Library are accepting applications for the $250 library research prize. The due date is February 15th. There is information on the library website, on the display in the library, or you can ask one of our friendly librarians here for more information. On Thursday, February 21st, we'll welcome Emily Stroud for an International Study Abroad Spotlight entitled Hakuna Matata, the South African Way. She'll share her discovery of how stereotypes of other countries blind us from seeing how beautiful different lifestyles can be and seeing God move in different ways than our sheltered U.S. experience allows. Sounds like a good topic. Today we welcome Jay Rasmussen and Dan Swinson from the Education Department as they share a rapid-fire exchange of teaching tips on a wide array of topics for all disciplines, class sizes, and levels entitled Top 21 and a Half Teaching Tips. Let's welcome them this morning.
I wonder if we need a theme song or something. I'm not sure what we need exactly. But thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you sharing your precious time. And I know it is really precious. Jay Rasmussen, I teach in the Ed Department. I work primarily with what we call Block 2, so I'm training teachers right before they hit student teaching time. Also Faculty Development Coordinator, and then at the grad level, I'm Director of a Master's in Ed program, and then teach in that program as well. So it's a fully online program. Dan will introduce himself in a second here. I think a lot of the tips that we're going to share today really come out of our philosophical beliefs about teaching and learning. And I wanted to share a quote with you that, for me, I think really captures a lot of what I believe, about teaching and learning. So, Dan, if you want to introduce yourself then too.
Dan Swanson. This is my fifth year here at Bethel University. I teach out of the Education Department, and my main focus there is I work with educational technology and also with the middle level education. At the grad level, I'm the director of the International Baccalaureate program, which is also fully online. It's a certificate program here. And I'm also fortunate to have taught a couple courses outside of the department. One course I teach is the MAT 207, which is the statistics course. A lot of nursing and business majors take that. And I also work with Jack Netland teaching the NAS Physics, which is the 104D course. And that's a quote that sort of summarizes sort of one of my view of education in a nutshell.
You should have a copy of our handout here. And what we'll be doing is we're going to work through 11 different general areas. So the first thing we'll take a look at is course planning. We'll look at community building, use of instructional strategies, and so forth. So for each of these major areas, we'll each be sharing a tip. So we're going to try to keep it rapid fire. I don't know if either Dan or I are rapid fire people, but that's what we're going to try to do anyhow. And we'll try to get through as many of these as we can. We'll kind of stop at the midpoint just to see if you've got some questions, that type of thing. And if for some reason we don't get through, we're going to turn this into a narrative PowerPoint as soon as we can both find a little time to do that. So that would be available too. But let's go ahead and jump in. We'd like to start with the learning target. Both Dan and I actually use learning targets quite a bit in our instruction. And it really helps, I think, add focus for the students. They get a good sense of, like, why am I here? What am I supposed to get out of this? So we do have a learning target for you, and we're pretty serious about this one. We would like you to commit, to trying 1 to 3 of the strategies that you're going to encounter today. And we're actually going to come back to this one at the end. So do have in mind a couple that you'd like to try. In all likelihood, all 22 of them that you're going to see today would not work for you. So make some decisions about what works for your personality, what works for your course content, what works for your students, what works for your class size, all of those issues. So do try to identify some that would be of value. Starting off with the idea of course planning, I'd like to throw in the concept of curriculum mapping. And if you're not familiar with this, it's, in my mind, just a fabulous way to build a new course. So anytime you have that luxury, or maybe that job, I think a fabulous way to start a new course is with a curriculum map. And this is probably about the simplest style map you can use, but it really starts off with you very clearly thinking, what objective am I going to have? And you're going to build out a list of objectives, and then you're also going to build out, I suggest, kind of one essential question for each objective. And that essential question is really the heart of what that objective is about. It's something that you can share with students then when you get into individual class sessions. So it should be worded in a way that they're really interested in it. The next jump then, this is really what kind of makes it backward design, is really thinking about assessment. So you've got an objective in mind, and then you're thinking right away, how would I know if they have accomplished that? In other words, what is the evidence that I could examine to know that they really have been successful with it? And then we start thinking about what kind of content would be necessary for them to be successful as they're doing that particular assessment. And then we start thinking what kind of instructional strategies are really going to help build the skills that they'll need to be successful with that, and then thinking resources. So it's a great tool when you're building a brand new course, but anytime you're doing course revision, this is what I actually will come back to. Our whole department right now is revising our entire LED program, and for us to understand what one another we're doing, we all actually built curriculum maps for existing courses, and then we shared those maps with one another, so we had a good clue of what our colleagues were actually doing.
This next graphic just illustrates in more detail what Dr. Asmussen was talking about. The way I like to think about this, one thing my wife and I are trying to do with our 3 kids, Anna, Joe, and Eric, they're 15, 13, and 11 right now. Having a math background, we sort of tried to keep that odd even thing going. But we're trying to get them to all 50 states by the time they're 18. Right now we're at about 43. And one thing we do a lot of is we plan trips. And when you plan a trip, you can't plan the activities first, because if you're going to be in Florida, you're going to have very different activities than when you're in Alaska or Maine. And so it's the same thing with planning the course that Jay just referred to, is that you really need to think about those targets, where you're going first. Once you figure out where you're going, the other things are going to fall into place, and Jay sort of talked about these pieces already. So
the part that's really backwards about it is the idea of you're starting with the end in mind. But the other part that's backward is, in our mind, we normally go from thinking outcomes to thinking how are we going to accomplish it. And then we throw in assessments, right? Kind of as an afterthought often. So it's kind of backward in the sense that you're very quickly getting to that idea of what assessment is going to match up with it.
And that will really, if you're producing your assessments in that second step, it really will drive the activities that you're going to do for teaching and learning.
When you think about community building, one strategy I've had good success with is, I'm going to call it speed dating here for lack of a better name. And I'm just going to demonstrate super quick how it goes. So if you were my class here, I'd have everybody number off 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So I'm going to pick on you guys here. So you're going to be a 1, you're a 2, you're a 1, you're a 2, you're going to be a 1. Okay, so I would do that with my whole class. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the 1s come up, if you could, please. So 1s come up. They're going to be in a central area here. Now, I've had classrooms that are so tiny, I've got to go find somewhere else to do it. They're going to be back to back. Okay, so they're going to be back to back. Okay, let's put you right in there. Okay, and then 2s, why don't you come up? Dan, why don't you be a 2? What the 2s are going to do is they're going to align themselves with one of the persons that's right in front of them there. So everybody's going to have a person. And then this is one I like to use at the start of the semester, but I'm using it now too as a review activity. So start of the semester, I have them, you can do it for up to about 30 people or so. And then what I would do is I give them a question at the start of the semester. First of all, they introduce themselves, then they get a question like, how would your best friend describe you? So they go ahead and talk a little bit. They're just talking away right now. And then I say, let's rotate. Okay, so they go clockwise then, clockwise. Boys and girls, we're going clockwise here. Same thing happens. And then they get a new question at that point. So it might be a question like, I'd like you to describe one of your passions in life, and where do you think that passion came from? Okay, so they kind of talk away a little bit. We rotate again. Then I might give them, now I start coming into my course a little bit. So I might say, as you think about this course now, think about something that you would be really excited about, as you're coming into this course. What would be something? They talk about that. Okay, so I keep going with those introductory things. Right now we're into week maybe 3 or 4 of the semester, and now I'm using it as a review thing. So if I just taught a bunch of stuff, it's going to be the same format. They kind of know what it is, but now I might say to them, we've been studying lesson planning. I'd like you to talk now about some different ways that you could build an anticipatory set. Okay, talk with your partner. And then they both exchange on the same topic. Okay, then I'm going to give them a second question. Usually I run about 5 questions or so. It's a pretty adequate amount. I love doing it in the middle of class or at the end of the class because it gets them up physically. And class has a whole different feel when you do this for some reason. I have no idea why, but it just takes on a different dimension. So people are closer and they're not in their little comfortable routines in some way. So thanks. Okay, appreciate it. Okay, so that's speed dating.
So this is sort of builds on that way to think about building community within your class, and this is based on the work of Peter Block, and also Jane and I have talked a lot about this as well as what this looks like in the classroom. But thinking about ways that you can actually build community. And this is going to, when we talk about bringing in collaborative group work later, sort of ties right in with that. But Block sort of thinks about 7 questions based on these categories. There's only 2, 4, 6 categories, but one has a couple questions that go with it. And just let me throw out a couple of the ideas what these questions are, and then we'll talk about how you might use them. But one is under possibility. What does success look like for you in your class? And these are questions that the students are answering, right? Thinking through these. A second one is, what doubts and reservations do you have about this class? Under commitment, what promises are you willing to make to your peers in order to shape a healthy class environment? And under gifts, what gifts and talents are you prepared to share to make this class better? Thinking about, because sometimes if the students come to class, and I remember back in my undergraduate days, there were some classes that you feel that way too. You come to class and sit in the back and think, okay, what do you have for me, right? Whereas you really want to think of your class as a community, right? That the teacher and the students have things to bring to make the class better. And one way I sort of start this is I do it online. It's a pre-class survey they take. And so, because our class time is very valuable, and I want them to think about some things heading into the class. I want to sort of have them thought through some of these questions. So I post a variation of either 5 to 7 on a questionnaire that they fill out before the first day of class, and then sort of getting them to think through them. And then sometimes, depending on the class, we do spend some time initially sharing some of this material with some of the classmates, especially if I'm moving into some type of collaborative group they're going to be with. But it's very effective, I think, from the standpoint of having them sort of switch their perspective on how they're approaching the class from what is in it for me, and sort of shifting gears to thinking about, what do I have to bring to the class? How can I make this better? How can I build a community that sort of improves the atmosphere so everybody can sort of raise their level of engagement and learning?
You can shoot Dad an email if you'd like to see the questions he uses. I use the same series actually at grad level. We'd be happy to share exact questions too, but they're based on Block's work. When it comes to instructional strategies, I'm going to pick up on just one real small one here, but it's the use of something called Jing, and probably quite a few of you are familiar with it. But Jing is a screen capture tool that's free, so you've got the address for it right at the top, and I like to use Jing anytime that I want students to see a process or a product that I'm asking them to be involved with in some way. So let me give you an example. So I have students writing a paper. I want them to use APA style. They have very little idea of what to do with APA style. So it's a process or product that I want them to really see. So just a real simple way that I use it, and I'll just show you what it would look like here.
Welcome to this Jing. The purpose of this presentation is to familiarize you with some citations that it's possible you use in your paper, and also to talk about some common errors that students have as they work with APA 6, especially in a reference section. Let's take a look at our first example here.
So I use it for APA style. I use it for a number of other things as well too. And students tell me that they really appreciate it because it gives them a chance to go back and look at things again, as they need to. So like I said, any kind of a process or any kind of a product, works particularly well for this thing.
So we're going to move into talking a little bit about flow theory. This is going to be a tough one to try to summarize just in a minute or two. But the basic idea is thinking about times where you experience flow. And a lot of times you'll associate this with artists or athletes that get so focused on what they're doing that they sort of lose track of time, that they're so immersed and involved in activity. And thinking about ways you can bring that into the classroom with different activities or assessments where you get the students so focused and involved that there's a lot of benefits if you can sort of have students experience the flow they're talking about. Generally, this is based on the work of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, I think is sort of how you pronounce his name. Mihai, sorry. Mihai. And it depends on the book you look at. I think that he's written a number of books, but you might summarize sort of what he's talking about in, Jay put this together, sort of bringing it down to 4 different elements you might think about when you're experiencing flow. And it doesn't mean you have to have all 4 of these. You may have 2 or 3, but generally you have a better chance of experiencing flow if you have more of these elements present. And just because you have elements present doesn't mean that you're going to experience flow either. But generally, these are the elements that you associate with flow. And this was done, they've done experiments, I think initially they had 100,000 participants around the world, that they actually put beepers on them, and they would beep them maybe 7, 8 times a day, and have them record what they were feeling, what they were doing, what they were thinking, and sort of put this together. And since then, they've added more to that. But the interesting thing about it, this sort of is common regardless of whether you look at age, culture, background. And so it's sort of something that sort of all people experience regardless of all those different features. Now, the way to bring this into the classroom is think about how can we build assessments or how can we build activities that have these different elements. And thinking about this sort of ties back before, but clear goals, giving clear goals, immediate feedback. It sort of talks about some of the learning targets we talked about before, but that feedback loop, right, that the feedback has to be fairly immediate. You want to have things that match the challenge and the skill level, so you're pushing students, but not too far. You want to build things that require really to immerse yourself in it, to really require a concentration level that's fairly high, and involve some type of personal control. Those are all elements that really are important if you're going to get students to experience flow.
I like to really think about these components, especially when I'm designing a new lesson. I like to intentionally think, have I established goals that the students have bought into? It's not just me laying out what my objectives are for them, but have they really bought into it? So as I'm designing something new, I really like to think about these different dimensions. And then I also use it when something doesn't work very well in my class. And what I have found is if something's not working, almost invariably I'm missing something. And the one that I struggle with the most, this is me personally, but is giving some kind of control to the students. I get kind of bossy sometimes when I'm teaching. But I found that often it works better if they've got some choices, that are actually involved. So these components can be helpful in initial design, but also if something's not working. What I have found is often you can just tweak one little thing. Maybe it's too hard, maybe it's too easy, maybe I need to differentiate a little bit within the class. That's super helpful that way too. In terms of facilitating discussions, that's a big challenge for all of us. And this is how I like to think about it anyhow. I like to think about trying to build habits that students follow when they come into my classroom. And I'm convinced that students have different habits in different classrooms with different instructors. And I think they establish a habit very early in the semester. And sometimes they get a habit of, I'm going to come into this class, I'm going to sit in the back of the room, and I'm not going to say anything. That's a habit. Once they start with that habit, it's hard to shake them out of it. You've got some others. Their habit is to come sit right in the front, be involved, smile, take notes, all that kind of stuff. That's a habit in some way. So what I try to do with this communication type thing is really get them into the habit of speaking very early. So even in the first class of the semester, within 15 minutes, I try to get them talking because I'm trying to build those habits. Now it's hard getting people talking in a big class because they're scared. They don't know how people are going to respond to them, how you're going to respond to them. So I personally really like to start off a semester with partner work. I'm still in partner work in most of my classes right now, but I'm giving them something pretty specific to talk about with a partner, and then we come back whole group, but then it's more, now tell me a little bit about what your partner said. How good of a listener were you? So I'm getting them used to talking in the room. I'm getting them used to talking in a larger group a little bit. Then I'll take them up to 3s or 4s. They start to feel pretty comfortable with that. They're starting to talk more. Then I can get a little more whole group discussion going. But I think it's always key that you give them just some really clear prompts. They've got to have some time to think about it, because you're going to have some students that are pretty slow processors, some that are pretty fast. So I think it's helpful to give them time. Anytime I come with a real tricky question that I want a whole group to respond to, I'll usually write it down, or I'll tell them, I've got a pretty hard question, that's how I say it, and I just want you to think about it a little bit. In fact, I don't want you to say anything now. I just want you to get something in mind. How would you respond to this question? Okay, I give them some time. It feels like forever, even though it's 15 seconds. But then I hear responses, and they've had a chance to rehearse it in their mind. Okay, they're not worried about sounding stupid, when they articulate their thought. So that works. And I do think, too, whether you've got partner things, you've got small groups, that idea of coming back to a large group, I think, is important because they care about what those other people were saying in those other groups. So that's a time that you can get a little more whole group type things going, too. But once you start kind of along these lines, it gets a lot easier in the semester to throw out a general question to the whole class and actually have somebody answer it. It's a lot easier because they have a habit of talking, when they're in the class at that point. So I think Dan's going to get a little more specific too.
So this sort of extends what Jay's talking about. And one thing that has worked for me and other teachers is using some of these thinking routines that are developed out of Harvard. Harvard developed, it must be a couple dozen thinking routines, all research-based on ways that individuals think in different disciplines. For example, the way you might think in mathematics might be different than the way you think in education or psychology or science. And so they sort of thought, what kind of routines do people go through when they think about things? And so, for example, one that I use sometimes is called a Connect, Extend Challenge, where a student would think about what connections they're making to the material or the content. And it could be reading, it could be watching a video, it could be a object they're thinking about, it could be work of art. There's all different ways to approach it. So get them to engage with material. A lot of times I'll do this outside of class. And so they'll have something to read or watch a video, and they'll use one of these thinking routines where they try to think through, engage with material. And sometimes I always have them post. And so they'll think through it, they'll do this like connect, how do they connect with it? And they answer some specific prompts. How do they extend? In other words, how did this, what they read or what they looked at, how did that extend their thinking, or how did it push them in new directions? And then the challenge would be, what's still challenging me? What questions do I still have? What wonderings do I have about this material? They sort of go through this process. They post on the Moodle site. You could have them respond to one or two people. So they're starting to think and engage outside of class. And then when they come to class, you can then follow up. It depends if you've already done some of this online. That could be online on a Moodle discussion, or you could bring it to class. And then you sort of what Jay talked about, you can bring it at some point either in the small groups or to the big discussion that they've already thought about this outside of class, they've talked about it, and now you can come back and talk about, sort of tie it together with the whole group. The really nice thing about the thinking routines, and they actually call them visible thinking routines, because the whole point is to make your thinking visible about something. So it's nice both for their peers, because their peers can sort of see how they're classmates are thinking. But it's also nice as a teacher because I can actually see how the students are thinking. If they're really making the connections I want them to, how this is extending their thinking. Is it pushing them in new directions? And you can really see that, and that's the whole point of it, right? That making it visible. So that's been a nice piece in sort of classroom discussions and both mood in and outside the classroom.
And then a lot of these routines are laid out in a book, basically by this title that you can look, can find on Amazon. Dan and I are running a book study group now too with a lot of these strategies. Most of them are very simple. Gretchen's actually tried one of them already and had good success with it. And so I do think it's a book really worth looking at. The first couple chapters in it are amazing on the learning theory that they lay out. Really some good stuff there. Yep. In terms of building student relationships, I think it's a really critical part of the learning experience for your students. And to me, learning is all about engagement. That's what we want. The more somebody is engaged in whatever it is, the more they're going to take from that experience. And within any single course, I like to really think about 3 critical points of engagement. The one that's really obvious that we always think about is like the content. I mean, we want them engaged with the content. So we think about that. And then I think we've got to also really think about how are we building engagement with the colleagues, with their colleagues in that class setting. Because often if we can build those connections and get them talking about what it is that they're learning, we've all of a sudden added a whole new avenue for them really to learn. So it's not just that we're trying to make little friends out of our students here, but we're trying to set up some kind of a structure where they can be talking and thinking together, about what the course content is. For some students, that is powerful, that ability just to talk about what it is that they're learning. But I also want engagement to take place with the instructor as well, too. I mean, I do hopefully have something meaningful to offer. So I'm going to try to be pretty intentional about how I build that engagement as well. Those are the 3 areas. For me, I think that a lot of the strength of a teacher comes out of the relationships that you can build with your students. And I think when you're standing in front of a class, maybe you've got a class of 20 or 30 or 50 or whatever, I think the instructors that are the most effective ones are ones that have been able somehow or another to really connect with each individual that's there. And if you've been able to build those relationships, and it takes time and energy, when they see you in the front, it's almost like they've got a conversation going on with you because they're connected in a personal way with you. Now that doesn't come by happenstance. It takes a lot of work. For me, just one real simple thing I try to do is I always try, if I can, to get to a class early. Okay, now hopefully nobody's right in front of me. That happens a lot of time. But I try to get to class early. And I try to get all my stuff set up, and I try to be ready, so when the first students start walking in, I can talk with them. Okay? The class becomes about them at that point, not me trying to get my stuff ready, trying to get my act together to be ready to teach. And it's amazing how they notice that. And students will actually start to come a little bit early to class sometimes, just because they can have some type of interaction that's going on. Now that's a tough one. When you follow somebody and you've got gigantic classes, it's a lot harder. But it is about, I think anyhow, those 3 points of engagement. Yeah.
So my idea talks about that last one Jay talked about, the engagement with the instructor and the student. The summer before I started here at Bethel, a friend of mine is a chemistry professor at McAllister. He talked to me about an idea that he occasionally used, and that was that he would take one bigger class that he had, either a semester or once a year, and actually meet individually with each of the students. So what I decided to do was and I've done this a few times now, is that I pick one of my biggest classes. And for example, that first semester I came here, it was the MAT 207, the stats class, with about 35 students. And what I had them do is that they were required to meet with me for 10 minutes. All right, and it was a big time commitment, but it definitely paid off. And so they'd each set up an appointment where they'd come in, and over the first 2 weeks, they'd have to come sit down and talk to me for 10 minutes in my office. And it was actually an assignment. So it was an assignment that had points on it. In the end, it was a very small amount because there's a lot of assignments in there, but it still was an assignment. And it paid huge dividends over that semester, and I've done it since with other classes as well. But it was nice in a big class like that just to have a chance to connect. And it was really just about them, sharing a little bit about their background, what brought them here to Bethel, a little bit about their high school experience, what other class they're taking, what do they want to do after Bethel. And it was a really nice way to connect. And like Jay talked about, I think it made the whole class run better once we start making those initial connections, sort of that buy-in. And sort of they know that you're someone who cares about them and beyond just a student, right? That it's there's a relationship there as well.
When they show up at your office, what do you do? What do you say with them? How do you handle that chat? Just curious.
Well, it's different. I mean, it's different with every student, but generally I just introduce myself, real quick introduction, but then just ask some questions about them, sort of start. A lot of times I'd start with the question, so, sort of neutral questions like, what's your major, why are you taking this class right now, things like that, and then talk a little bit about why they're here at Bethel. And just generally it helps to start with questions that are fairly neutral, and then sort of see where the conversation went. All the conversations look different, but it was just a chance to connect and talk to the students, especially in a big class, because it's hard when you have 35 students there to really get to know their names and find a little bit about them. So that's been helpful.
I just wondered, in a content class, how did you tell them about this is what we're going to do?
Just the first day of class.
Yeah.
So I would just took a minute to talk about why we're doing it, and that they would just had to set up an appointment. I just passed a sheet around, and everybody signed up for a time, and then sometimes I'd shoot out a reminder. But generally they'd sign up, write in their calendar, and they would just show up. There was you might have maybe 2 or 3 out of 35 that needed a reminder. They missed a meeting or something, but it works pretty well. But it is very time consuming, so I would generally just pick one. I do it once. I've just done it a few times over the last 5 years, but I generally pick one class that was bigger, that I want to take the time to connect with the students.
With faith integration, it's something that we all think about and is valuable to us. I like to operate, in all my teaching actually, I like to operate with this principle, that whoever does the most work really learns the most. And unfortunately, oftentimes it's kind of me that does the most work for a class, and I learn a lot. But more and more, I'm just haunted with this idea of how can I get them doing more work than I'm doing. And usually if I can do that, they wind up learning a significant amount. And I feel this really holds true with faith integration, too. So many times, I feel like I'm trying to lay out, how a particular topic, how faith integration really weaves into that. For example, one of the subject areas I work with is measurement and assessment. So for years, I would do my nice little devotion on what kind of biblical principles do you see that relate to assessment in some way. And I had my little devotion put together and thought about it a lot, and I kind of unpacked it pretty well. And then I said, let's get them working with this. Why should I do all the work? So I've turned it over to them. And I use it as forum discussions so they can really think deeply about it. But this is one of the responses I got. And I'm convinced I'm seeing stuff from them that's better than anything that I ever produced, when I was doing my little devotion. So I like to put a lot of faith integration things right back on them. And then we process it, what they're coming up with and ways of thinking about it.
So this is not exactly faith integration, but it's a way to bring faith and faith into the classroom. When people ask me, if I meet someone at a gathering or a get-together, the question always is, what do you do? And I say, that's right. Bethel University, I always ask, so what's one of your favorite things? What do you like about it? And I would always have to say that my top 3 for sure is student-led devotions. And I've done this actually since my first year, so I've done it 5 years. And what I'll do is first day class, I'll ask the students that they can sign up. It's a voluntary thing that they can sign up to share devotion sometime during that semester. And generally what I have, it varies with the class, but generally I'll have about 50% of the students sign up and say they're willing to share devotion. They can either put a yes, no, or a maybe. And you get a lot of yeses, a few maybes, and a lot of the maybes eventually change their mind and move to a yes once they see a few and see how it goes. But it's really varied over the years. And they go anywhere from 30 seconds sometimes. Most of them are on 2 or 3 minutes. And then I sort of try to cap it at 4 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes. And it's amazing what they share. Sometimes they're in a book group and they'll share a little bit about what they're talking about in their book groups. They might be in a Bible study and sort of share something they're talking about there. Others just share part of their testimony. Other students will, there's just something on their heart, whether it's, something here at Bethel or in a larger community that they want to share. But they're often very challenging. They'll challenge their peers in a very respectful and meaningful way. They're always very relevant. And it's really been a great part of all my classes. And generally, over a 14-week class, if you have, a class like 35 students, you get about half the students doing it, works out, because then you have, ends up being about once a week. So it's a really nice addition to the class. And I think it is a great way to build community and bring faith in.
Well, let's open it up to any kind of quick questions. We have a whopping 7 or 8 minutes here, so pretty quick on the questions if you have it, or comments at all too. And Dan and I are more than happy to talk privately about any of these things.
I have a question about the 10-minute chat. How does that work differently from just meeting? I'm with conferences. I know with conferences you have something that you're already talking about, and it's usually something that's been happening in that class. But is it? Can you weigh the difference between a 10-minute chat and a 10-minute conference?
To me, it seems like the chat is just about getting to know them as a person. Your conference, I know your writing conference is specific to the writing. My hunch is that you've already got enough personal connection with them because of the conference time already. I would tend to use the chat a little more when it's a bigger class. You just feel like you're not connecting terribly well with them. That would be more when I would tend to use it. That'd be my take on it. I'm actually going to start using some 10-minute chat. I like the idea a lot.
Yeah, like a 15. If you have smaller classes, the connections happen just easier. But just based on the format of, for example, the statistics class, I thought sometimes it's harder to connect in a class like that. You have 35, so that just felt like a good way to connect. But if you have things like that are happening, you're already making connections in different ways. That's why I always would just pick one class, per year where I thought it might be a good way to do it, where they might not happen as naturally.
Okay, yep, Jason, sorry.
Yeah, just a quick thing on the speed thing. I'm trying to picture how much time you spend, what goes into how much time you
Yeah,
spend.
I only use about 5 or 6 prompts normally, and I would say the whole thing start to finish is maybe 10, 11, 12 minutes.
So maybe 1 or 2 minutes per question.
Yep. And often, you need an even number, so often I wind up being in it if I have an odd number, which I like, because I get a sense of how long I should go with it. So it depends on your question. When you think they're done responding to it, you just go to the next one.
Yeah, you want to keep it moving.
You want to keep it moving. They absolutely love it, and it really it has a different feel to the class after. I don't know what it is, but yeah, it's a great review activity too. So, okay, Dan?
Good one.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, Rufus.
No,
Okay.
it's tied to Jason's question about speed dating. How do you get them to respond to the questions you ask? I mean, let's say, well, this is a class of 40.
Yeah, they're standing right in front of a person, and they start talking.
No, but how do you get the response? Because, well, how do they debrief the class? Because you are answering them questions. They're responding to each other, so how do you get their feedback?
Yeah, a lot of times I don't do a group processing after that. Sometimes I will, and I'll say, is there anything that you didn't feel quite comfortable talking about? And we can get into that. Or is there any questions that came up, some things that all of a sudden you felt unsure about when you had to talk about them? So I'll do it that way as well, too. So, yeah.
You want to go back to think about which ones they want to.
Yeah, we're looking at probably 5-6 minutes at this point. Why don't we do one more, Dan, and then maybe we can just kind of hear from you a little bit as to which ones you're interested in. Dan and I will make this into a narrated PowerPoint, and we'll probably send out something on C faculty. So the ones you didn't pick up on, you can come back and certainly work with them too. Let's do one more.
So we're going to move into cooperative group learning. And one thing I've done over the years is a lot of collaborative groups. And I think if I reflect back, I think what I was doing was okay. But I remember talking to Dr. Weiss a couple of years ago with some of the stuff, some of the research she'd done, and some of what she was doing in classes, and I think I improved a little bit. And then there was another staff development opportunity this fall that I dug a little deeper, and I think I was able to take it to the next level and really had a great experience with bringing in the cooperative teams in my statistics class I taught over interim. And it was a perfect time to try it out because A, it's interim, and you have a lot of time to spend with the students, and it's also a bigger class. I think we had 30 in that class. And so from day one, they were in cooperative groups, and this sort of builds on the work of block. And so when you think of that community building, we took some time online to have them answer some of those questions that we talked about earlier. And then we brought some of those into class, and we actually spent some time the first couple days to actually develop a team charter to talk about community, talk about some of the responses to the prompts that we used based on block work. And they spent the entire semester, or in this case interim, in those groups. And they were in teams of, I think there was teams of 4 and then a couple teams of 3. And they worked together on projects and activities in those groups. They also did some discussions in those groups. And the nice piece, too, is obviously there's a lot of material they have to present. So, you know, just based on the work of Dr. Weiss, so similar model what she uses in some of her classes, you know, maybe I talk for 10, 12 minutes, and then give them 3 or 4 minutes to work in those teams. And across all those different areas, you know, I think I was very happy with how it worked. I actually got some feedback. Midterm, I did a midterm sort of evaluation. Got really positive feedback from the students on how their groups are working and how it was working for them to connect and engage with material. I think we're getting our cutoff sign here.
I think both Dan and Sarah are great resources on this. If you want to do some teamwork with them, they've got it down.
Well, Sarah's a great resource. I've sort of just used her information, some of her research, but it worked. I know it worked very well for me over interim.
Okay. Well, if you need to leave, I sure want to respect that. Feel free to do that. If you've got a couple minutes still, we would like you to think about these questions here. Not going to hold you to 3 strategies because you've kind of heard about half of what we have here. But if you do have time, think about maybe 1 or 2 of the strategies that you would like to try, and then I would like you to articulate why does it fit you. I think that's really important to think about on any strategy. Why does it fit your students, especially are they freshmen, sophomore, where are they at in things, and how does it fit your discipline? Okay. So if you could pair up maybe with 1 other person, maybe 2 other people, and then just talk through what you've heard so far. You know, sounds really good. And then we are going to put this up as a narrative PowerPoint. As soon as we can get it together is what it'll be. And you've seen about half of it, actually. This was a super hard thing to time. But hopefully you'd be interested in the other half of it as well. So, and thanks again for coming. And go ahead and talk, but feel free to leave if you need to as well.